Hi, I'm Cam,
And I'm Dev.
and you're listening to Criminalish podcast, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So, as we mentioned in our last episode, we are going to be interviewing a former member of Yogaville. So, here today with us, we have Brianna Patten, who is the creator and host of the Surviving Satchidananda podcast, a podcast that goes into her experience at Yogaville as well as other former members' experience at Yogaville. So, Brianna, we gave you a bit of an intro already, but we'd love for our listeners to hear your story in your own words. Can you explain who you are and your journey?
Sure. My name's Brianna, and when I was 21 years old and on a gap year from college, I went to this place called Yogaville, intending to just stay there for a month and do a month-long 4-week yoga immersion. And I ended up staying for about 4 years. And I left Yogaville physically in 2019. I think it was towards the end of August. I left, but I still worked for them virtually and really still believed. I mean, I still do believe in the power of yoga and things like that, but I was more gung-ho about the mission, I would say, after I left, and still felt like even though I figured out all these bad things were happening, I still wanted to be involved. And then there were all these controversies. The Tiger King documentary came out, which featured a lot of people that I knew from Yogaville. And so that was kind of crazy. And then as more and more people kept coming out with stories and the administration just continued to shut these people down, I realized, I think it was 2022, that I was like, I need to formally disaffiliate from this organization and ask them to, well, I didn't ask, I demanded that they take down all my images from their website. And I worked in their marketing department. So I was writing a bunch of blogs for them, and I told them to take all my blogs down unless they were going to address all these issues.
Wow, that progression from expecting to stay a month and that month turning into 4 years physically and 7 years in total of affiliation is wild. Just how I'm sure that sort of changed the trajectory of what you expected your life to be at that point. And in our podcast episode, we talk about how Shanti Norris published her story in 2021 and how Yogaville responded to that. And along with that, the lawsuits that came after that. So I can only imagine from your side with Tiger King and the Doc Antle story and all of that, how it must have felt to be not only affiliated with the organization, but to also know the people who were being put in the spotlight with some of these stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting because everybody was watching Tiger King, and I had no idea that Yogaville was going to be on there. So in the first season, the Doc Antle story came later, but the first season, I think it was episode 2 or 3, and I was like, wait, is that Swami Satchidananda on a picture in this guy's house? But a lot of stuff started making sense after I saw that, because Doc, or I don't even want to call him Doc because he's not a doctor. They say he just he just went to China and paid someone to forge a medical degree for him. His name's Bhagavan Antle, and he, the way that he keeps these women in control and working for him for free, he basically used the same system that Swami Satchidananda implemented at Yogaville. So then that's when a lot of wheels started turning in my head. Oh wait, there's way too many similarities here. This is not just some random guy that lived at Yogaville and then left and did some crazy stuff afterwards, Swami Satchidananda uplifted this man, and then Bhagavan modeled his whole business after what he learned from living at Yogaville, basically.
Yeah, and on top of that, when we were doing our research and looking into his marriages that he had in his 20s, maybe early 30s, with women who were teenagers when they met, so girls, a lot of them he met at Yogaville. Not only do you instruct people on how to create an environment where you can exploit them, you're also creating an environment that gives a lot of opportunity for these abusive relationships.
Yeah. There's just so many. Not everybody at Yogaville is a predator and is evil. I'm not saying that by any means, but it is very easy for it attracts these types of people because they know that followers of this religion or organization are very loyal, and you've bought into a certain amount of kind of brainwashing in a way. And so these types of people who are narcissistic and like to take advantage of people flock to a place like Yogaville.
So during our last 3 episodes of this series, because it started out just being a 1-part series and then research after research after research, and me and Kim were like, well, this is now a 3-parter. Because there's
you
so
went down
much
the rabbit hole.
Exactly. There was so much information and it just kept going deeper and deeper. But one of the things that we thought was really important during our series was to give a clear definition of what we believe to be a cult and what that means. Because when we looked into the Merriam-Webster definition, it's like any group that calls himself a group is a cult. And clearly that is not accurate and leaves a lot to be desired. So during our series, we've defined a cult as a social group defined by its religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs, practices, or devotions to a specific leader, object, or ideology, often considered unorthodox or outside mainstream society, typically led by a charismatic figure who claims special knowledge or divine authority. Cults foster unwavering loyalty among followers. Their beliefs are often presented as the sole path to truth, salvation, or enlightenment, reinforcing dependence on the group while distancing members from the outside world. Members are expected to devote significant time, energy, and financial resources to the group, often at the expense of personal relationships and well-being. Cults also maintain secrecy, restricting access to core teachings and rituals until members demonstrate a certain level of commitment, fostering a sense of superiority through their perceived exclusive knowledge. Does this definition align with your beliefs and what you think, or is there anything you think we're missing in our overall definition?
Yeah, I would say that's a very comprehensive definition. I think I would add that cults exist on a spectrum. So an excuse that a lot of people who are in cults will say, like they'll run through that list that you just went through, and they'll say, oh, well, we don't have this one thing, so we're not a cult. But if you have like 5 of the 7 or a certain amount, then you're on the higher end of that spectrum. And cult scholars and sociologists have been debating what the definition of cult is for a while, for decades, actually. But something that newer that's coming up is a lot of sociologists, or a few of them that I've read at least, are challenging the fact that there even needs to be a charismatic leader, because we see, like with QAnon, it doesn't exist in a physical space. This was an online movement, and there wasn't like one guy telling everybody what to do that everybody was believing in, but they still operated with this cult-like groupthink. But yeah, I think that's a great definition.
Thank you. And I do think that's a very good point, because that is something that we mentioned before. It's the picking and choosing of certain wording and certain things that don't make you a cult. It's like, well, yeah, we don't have this one thing. We just have the other 19. So it's fine. Like, I don't understand this all or nothing thinking in that regard, because it is very much a spectrum and like what's included and what isn't included.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I feel like the QAnon example is a good one, because I think that in the age of the internet and social media, how cults operate and what cults look like is changing. You also have, I can't remember her name, but there's also this woman who was on TikTok, and she had this cult following, and really the harm was being exacted on the people who were in her close circle, but she was being funded through her large social media following, essentially. And so she didn't have to really have physical power over all of those people. She had sort of financial and more mental power over them, but she did have physical power over the people in her close circle. So I think with social media, things becoming viral, people finding new ways to spread information, cults are only going to continue to change and evolve.
Yeah, and I bet that whoever that cult leader was probably just didn't need all of the people. Like, everybody was probably serving their own purpose. So all these people online were probably, like you said, giving her money, and she probably just didn't need them in her physical presence. But if she needed someone, she probably could have just gone to someone who was very deeply into it and said, like, oh, God wants you to come move here with me and serve this mission. So yeah, I don't think being in a physical location or an isolated physical location is necessary in this day and age.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think sometimes it's easy for people to forget that cults escalate. There's an escalation amongst there. It always starts relatively simple. It's small demands. It's small demands here and there. There's a grooming nature to it all to get you comfortable with things becoming more and more extreme. And I think sometimes people can forget about that importance of every cult leader didn't start at the most extreme instance. It became that over a very long time.
Yeah. And another, again, that definition you gave in the beginning was very comprehensive, but something I've been saying recently is a cult is just like an abusive relationship with a group. So like if you get into an abusive one-on-one relationship, the person's not just going to start off on the first date like beating you. They're going to love bomb you. They're going to make you feel really good. They're going to make you feel like the only person in the world, and then slowly just like start breadcrumbing you, and then eventually, you know, it can get more and more severe. And so like in Taraji P. Henson's autobiography, she talks about her relationship, her abusive relationship with this man who like beat her within an inch of death, basically, and she still stayed with him. And like that's how strong these ties can be. Is it can get really extreme, and you still are committed and want to stay.
Yeah. And something that we stated in our podcast as well is that it's really important when talking about cults not to victim blame current and former cult members. I feel like sometimes people have this assumption that, oh, that could never happen to me. Both with large scale cults and even in abusive relationships, you have people saying, oh, I would never get in an abusive relationship. I would just leave. I would never get in a cult. I would just leave. And it's really important to recognize that it can really happen to anyone. It's all about catching somebody at the right or wrong time in their lives, right or wrong time in sort of where they are mentally. And so with that in mind, can you sort of talk us through what initially attracted you to Yogaville?
Sure. I, like I said, was on a gap year from college. It was my sophomore year of college, and it was towards the end of that semester I actually attempted suicide. And leading up to that, I had changed my major like 6 times. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing here, but I know this is really expensive, and this is not. I should not be in college right now if it's causing me this much stress, and I also don't know what I want to study. So I got a job at Yellowstone National Park for a summer and had an awesome time. And there was a group of employees there, and we would practice yoga together. And one of my friends who I practiced yoga with was from around the area where Yogaville is. And it was just one day after we were done practicing yoga, he was like, there's this place near where I'm from called Yogaville. It's really weird, but I feel like you would like it. You should check it out. And I was like, okay. And I still, was I had no plans of going back to school at that point. And I just went on their website and saw they had this 4-week long program that was like, this yoga can make you happy always. And as someone who was really depressed at the time, I was like, okay, well, like, $500 a month and I'll be happy forever. Like, yeah, I'll take that risk. And then, yeah, that's how I got in, and that's how I ended up staying. Because that first month was awesome.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for being very comfortable to share your experience about kind of what led you up to that position in your life. So I want to thank you for being willing to share that with us, with our audience, and with your audience as well, with your podcast that we're going to leave linked in the description of these episodes. So make sure you guys go support Brianna on her journey. But to kind of get back into what you felt when you initially got there, what were your initial experiences when you got to Yogaville?
Well, when I first got there and got out my car, the road to Yogaville, I mean, it was like about 4.5, 5 hours from where I grew up. So I drove that way. And towards the end of that road, it's this windy road in the mountains. And so I remember just getting out of my car and being kind of dizzy and disoriented from that long drive and all the turns. And I signed in and they were like, this is your dorm room. This is where you can check in, put your stuff down, and then you can, do all this stuff before you're expected to go to your classes and things like that. And so I went in, tried to put my stuff away, and I opened the door, and my roommate was sitting on the edge of her bed, like staring at me. Like she wasn't like on her phone or anything. She was just sitting on the edge of the bed, like, and had this weird look in her eyes. And she was just like, "I've been waiting for you." And I was like, "What the hell is this?" And she was like, she was Mexican. She was like, "My name is Canela." And I was like, there's this girl who is waiting for me and her name is Cinnamon. Like, what does this mean? But I think what happened, because she had never been there before. So it wasn't like she was a member that was like, I don't know, trying to be weird. I think she was just kind of like scared and weirded out too, and was like, just wanted someone else to be there. But yeah, it was really weird going there for the first time. And then I remember that night, and she was really cool. We still are like friends on social media and stuff. But there's, if you look on Yogaville's website, they have this thing called the Lotus Temple, and it looks really like pristine and magnificent and beautiful on the website. And then I remember us going in there at night for the first time, and it was just like so much smaller and hadn't been updated since like the 80s. And we like looked at each other, we were like, is that it? Like, so yeah, that's what I remember about my first day at Yogaville.
I actually find it so interesting for you to validate one of the things that I saw over and over again, because during our recording, it was my job to look up like the stays and the reviews of Yogaville. And like everybody's number one complaint is the fact that this has not been updated since the 80s. So
yeah,
everything was super old, and apparently there was a lot of bugs. So that was like the number one complaint.
Yeah, definitely the carpet is still from the 80s. This like blue Berber carpet.
Oh, that's awful.
And yeah, and then the bugs, I know where I was in the dorm, like the specific dorm that I was in didn't have bugs, but the Lotus guest house room where guests stay, they're more like hotel rooms and not dorms. They would get like infested with ladybugs over the summer, and there was really nothing they could do about it. Like they would come and suck them up with the vacuums, but like the ladybugs would just swarm. Even my like, this is kind of off topic, but in college, my dorm freshman year dorm room was infested with ladybugs too, and we had to call a guy with a shop vac every morning to suck up the ladybugs because they would come through the air conditioning, and you can't like close that vent. So yeah, there were definitely bugs in the dorms or in the hotel rooms at Yogaville.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, so you've told us about your first day, first night there. Can you talk us through what a typical daily routine was like for you when you lived at Yogaville, both in that first month and then how it maybe progressed from there?
Yeah, the first month is much more structured than once I became an employee. So the first month we would have to meditate. I think it was 4 or 5 times a week at 5 a.m. So the first few days that we had to do that, there's actually this old woman Swami there that plays a violin to wake people up. And I didn't know she was going to do this. So I like put my alarm clock on to get up at 5 or like at 4:45 or something. And like, it's 4 a.m. and I'm all tired. And like, I grab my toothbrush and I walk out and there's this old lady in orange with a violin like right in front of my face. And I was like, wait, I was not expecting that. But that only happened like for like the first weekend I was there. So after that, we would wake up. I wouldn't even need an alarm clock then because there were so many people in the dorms that were waking up at the same time. I would just kind of get up with everyone else and be sitting on the cushion at 5 a.m. And it was like an hour and 10 minutes of meditation. It would start out with chanting in Sanskrit, and then it would go into silent meditation. And then after that, there was a yoga class that started at 6:20. So I would go to that, and that's an hour and a half long class. So after the class, we would go to breakfast. Sometimes I would have a shift that started at 8. Either they had you working all over the place, but I mostly worked in the kitchen because I wanted to, but they had like kitchen and housekeeping, and they had a farm that people could work on. So you would usually start your first shift at like 8 a.m., which would be like 3 hours. And then there would be a meditation at noon. That was 30 minutes. And then after that, at 12:45 was lunch. And then after lunch, sometimes you would have an afternoon shift for another 3 hours, and then sometimes you wouldn't. So you could have like a little bit of a break time. And then there was another opportunity for, you could either go to a yoga class or another meditation, and all the yoga classes are always an hour and a half. And then after that, there would be dinner, which dinner was always soup. And they had a salad bar. It was always really good soup. I loved it. The food there was awesome. That's one of the things that kept me there was the great food. But I heard it's not as good anymore because so many people left. Like all the good cooks don't work there anymore. But yeah, so then after dinner, sometimes they would have like supper cleanup. So you would have to clean up the dishes of everyone afterwards. Or they would have a scripture study class. So there's some yogic Hindu texts like the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and there would be someone you would like, it was like kind of like a reading group where you would read these philosophy books and talk about it, which I always really liked those classes. And then usually you're in bed by like 9 because you got to wake up really early in the morning. But they also had a cafe called the Mandala Market, which I think was open till 10. So you could theoretically like go, and they sold like chocolate there because all the food was super healthy. So if you wanted to eat something unhealthy or like have coffee or like get a bag of chips or something or they would have game nights and stuff, you could hang out in the cafe. But most of the time for that first month, I was asleep by 9 at the latest. And I really got into the routine, and after a while, I really liked it. But the longer you stay there, they kind of ease up a little bit. So once you become an employee, you don't have to do any of that stuff anymore. You can if you want to, but it's not required. So like if you don't do that stuff during your first month, you sign an agreement basically saying like, if I don't do this, I risk getting kicked out. So once I became an employee, I didn't really do any of the 5 a.m. anymore. I would go to the 6:20 yoga a lot of the time. But it would be the same like 3-hour block of a shift, and then like an hour and a half long lunch, and then another 3-hour shift. Yeah, and it's like they had the same, like the ashram schedule was the same, but when you're an employee, you didn't have any yoga or meditation requirements.
And as an employee, can you talk us through some of the different things that you would do?
Yeah, so one of the issues at Yogaville was once you became an employee, it was hard to make enough money to pay your rent. And because if you lived like quote unquote off campus, but still like in a Yogaville owned building or like a building that someone else owned in the area, you still had to pay rent, and they only paid minimum wage, and minimum wage in Virginia at the time was like $7.25. So I had like I had so many different jobs there. At one point I worked in the reservations department, and I was able to get full-time work there. So for a while I was in the reservations department, and then at one point I worked in the marketing department. So I would work in the office building, and then I was also a cook, so I would cook in the kitchen sometimes. And I also worked at the cafe. So I would I would do all of that and just pick up shifts wherever I could to get more money. And then sometimes there would be people in the community that needed help. So there was elders in the community that needed someone to drive them to dinner and eat with them. So there was this older lady who I would pick up and take her to dinner a few times a week sometimes. And sometimes people need their house cleaned in the community, so I would do that. I would just hustle and do whatever I needed to do to make a little extra money.
Yeah, I think the point about them not paying you enough to actually be able to fully support yourself, especially if you were living off campus, is an interesting one, and goes back into that piece of our cult definition around controlling people financially. Because although you did have the opportunity to make money, it wasn't ever really enough to where if you decided, you know what, I want to go move somewhere else, you didn't really have the resources to do that, especially if you didn't have support from parents, other family, or friends.
Yeah. That was a big thing, is you don't have the ability to leave. Like after you stay there for a while, you become dependent on the ashram because they give you all your food. Your food was included in your employee package, and so was like all your yoga and meditation classes. So like I would justify it to myself like, okay, well, if I was living in the real world, my rent would be much higher and I would have to pay a yoga studio like hundreds of dollars to do this, and I'm getting all this great organic food that's prepared for me 3 times a day. So that was part of it. And there was the philosophical aspect too. They called it karma yoga, or they say that yoga has like 8 branches, and there's 8 different paths that you can use to reach enlightenment, is what they say. And one of them is karma yoga, or the yoga of selfless service. So it's this philosophy that if you're doing something for someone else, you shouldn't do it with the idea that you're going to get anything in return. Like if you're going to give someone a gift, you should give it to them just for the joy of giving and not have any attachment to the outcomes. And that was the main path that Swami Satchidananda talked about the most, I would say. And so they would say, oh, we're giving you an opportunity to do karma yoga. And the more you do this, like you're cleaning up your past life karma and will help you reach enlightenment quicker. So it's like you don't really have the resources to leave, but there's also this ideology that some people buy into and some people don't, but you're like, oh, well, if I'm not really making money, but there's this spiritual benefit, and I'm actually, so rich because I have this opportunity to practice karma yoga in this community.
I think that's an interesting point. Not only was there the benefit of having the food made for you and not having to worry about that, I can personally attest that having to figure out what to eat every day is one of my least favorite things about adulthood. But like you said, there was also the point of this is spiritually benefiting me. I am spiritually rich by being here. I may not be materially rich, but I am spiritually rich. And in talking about how they pushed their ideas of spirituality and discussed that, I'm also curious when and how often Satchidananda's name and teachings were brought into life at Yogaville.
Oh, it was all day, every day. Like the second you woke up, his poster was everywhere. So sometimes it would be in your like physical dorm room, but if it wasn't in the dorm room, it was in the hallway. So it's like one of the first things you're seeing when you wake up in the morning is his face. And then in the 5 a.m. meditation, the chants that they're doing in Sanskrit are invoking the presence of Swami Satchidananda. So you're saying like, basically like, Swami Satchidananda, please protect me and help me get the benefits of this meditation. So, and also when you're sitting in meditation, his face is at the altar, or a picture of him is at the altar. So there's that. And then once you go to your yoga class, you do more chanting, and there's an altar in every meditation hall and studio. So it's like the pictures in the meditation hall, and then you go to the different room for the yoga studio, and there's the same pictures. And usually by that time, the candles in the meditation room were always on, but in the yoga studios, the teacher would usually come in at that time and light a candle that was beneath his picture, and to like, you know, as an offering, this offering of light to the guru. And then you would say the chants again. And then after that, you would have breakfast. They didn't do prayers at breakfast time. They did prayers at lunchtime and dinner time. And in those prayers, they say, Jai Shri Satguru Maharaj Ki, which means victory to like the great guru, basically. And when I worked in the kitchen, we would all like hold hands and pray before each shift. So again, you're like praying and invoking that. And there's an altar to him in the kitchen where I would work, where we would light a candle most of the time. Someone would light it, but sometimes we were like involved in helping light that. And then anytime anything good happened, it was a thing at Yogaville to say Jai Guru Dev, and Guru Dev means like the great. Well, there's a lot of like Sanskrit. It's really difficult to have a direct translation, but it means like the great guru or the big mind. So like if anything good happens, they say like victory to Swami Satchidananda, basically. So it's really all day, every day that they're invoking his presence. Oh, yeah. And I wore this shirt with his face on it today just for fun.
I saw that when we were setting up, and I actually went, oh, does she have merch?
Yeah, this is my last piece of merch from Yogaville that I decided to wear today. Because I don't wear it in public anymore, so I was like, I might as well get a use out of this.
Yeah.
There you go.
Something I think is really interesting that a lot of cults and organizations that exact some form of control will do is not only immortalizing their leader if their leader is no longer physically with us, but making their leader omnipresent.
Mm-hmm.
They are always watching you. So you have to be on your best behavior. You know, you have to be following the rules that they do. And by doing things like invoking his name in prayers, meditations, before you eat, whenever something good happens, it's just this constant reminder that, oh, you're being watched by this person, by this guru.
Yeah, and it's funny that you use the word omnipresent, because that was in one of the prayers. They would say like omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. And that, like, those are the qualities of the guru. So he's always like Santa Claus. He's always watching whether you're sleeping or not. And that's a part of. There's a cult scholar whose name is Janja Lalich. You can spell her name Janja. But she, in her theory of how cults bind members, it's called bounded choice theory. So basically it says like all of your quote unquote choices in the cult are determined by, they're limited. They're bounded by these factors. And one of the ways that cults keep you in there is there's these elements of social control. So there's physical people like swamis and other people who live at the ashram who are making sure that you're doing everything. And if you step out of line, someone's probably going to physically say something to you. But then when you buy into the ideology, you become the person who's monitoring your own actions because you believe that you're being watched not only by the other people in the group, but by this omnipresent force.
So I know we've talked about how often Swami Satchidananda's name was invoked in life, but I'm also curious, what did you learn about him when you got to Yogaville? Did you already know about him? Did they have some sort of course or pamphlet that told you about him?
Yeah. So I didn't know anything about him before I arrived there. But part of the scripture study classes is you're only reading his books. So there's like the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are like are yogic texts that are, you know, these ancient texts, but then all these different gurus have their own interpretation and they make their own books with their own commentary. So we're reading these books with his commentary. And these people who knew him in real life, these people all say that Swami Satchidananda greatly benefited them, are teaching you about this philosophy. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about Yogaville is like part of the cult definition is they say like this is the one true path. Yoga, they're really smart and subtle with the manipulation at Yogaville in a lot of ways, because they're not saying like if you don't do this then you're not going to get enlightened. They say like truth is one, paths are many. So they're saying like anybody can get enlightened, but this is also a really good path to enlightenment, and if you choose it then you shouldn't do anything else. Like once you make a commitment you have to like keep that commitment for the rest of your life basically. So that like the people who are teaching you the philosophy knew him in real life and are committed to this path of integral yoga. So we would learn about him in those classes pretty much. And then also at lunch, for the first 30 minutes of lunch, this goes back to your earlier question, but also this one, it's silent for the first 30 minutes of lunch and they only read his talks for those first 30 minutes. And you could sit outside if you wanted to and you didn't want to listen to the talks, but for the most part, and also if it was like cold outside, you wouldn't want to sit outside. So you were listening to a Swami Satchidananda talk or lecture for the first 30 minutes you're eating.
So I loved your answer to the last question because, again, it brings into the nuances of defining cults and why it's so hard, and that like nitpicking thing of like the illusion of choice, similarly to when you play like video games that have like all these endings, but you really only get like 3 or 4 and they pretend to make every choice so important when the game truly is designed to put you at one ending. And I think that's a really important thing to discuss when it comes to like that manipulation to bind members to a cult, and kind of get an idea of what do you see as the key methods of indoctrination and manipulation that Yogaville specifically use to cultivate that belief and kind of bind members to them.
Yeah. So for myself, since Swami Satchidananda was not alive while I was there, I wasn't really bound as much by the physical guru as a lot of the older people were. Like a lot of the people who were there from the beginning, like talk a lot about their personal one-on-one relationship with him. But back to Yanya Lalich's theory to the indoctrination, I think, was like the philosophy classes and the elements of social control with the other people who you're living in close proximity with a lot of people, so you're never really alone unless you go off into the woods by yourself, because it's like 700 acres and there's a lot of wooded trails and things like that. So you could get lost in the woods if you wanted to, but for the most part, like you're going to be around other people. And there's the also like the requirements of your specific program. So like you would have to be at your shifts and follow all these rules, and if you didn't follow these rules then you could get kicked out. And once you are in there for long enough, like we said before, you're probably not going to have enough money to leave if you didn't come there with money. So I think all of those work together to indoctrinate people, but it is kind of like a slow and gradual process. Like for the light program, they like it was an intense program, but they would tell the employees and stuff like it was called the Living Yoga Training Program or the Light Program. They would say keep the lights in the bubble. So like they would be like, don't show them any of the the bad parts of the ashram. Don't like tell them in on all this horrible things that are happening behind the scenes because you want to protect their bubble and their spiritual journey or whatever. But really, it's like when you're in the light program, you think like, oh, Yogaville's just an amazing place, and I feel so great because I'm doing all this yoga and I'm eating so healthy, and there's a lot of really nice people here. And then once you're like, the longer you stay, the more you find out, and it's like after you've already made this commitments, a lot of the times that you find out things that you probably wouldn't have stayed if you would have known in that first month or before you came.
I find it really interesting that they'll say the quiet part out loud to the employees, saying, keep these members from finding out about some of the more unsavory parts of the ashram.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're, of course, on some levels conscious of the fact that they are controlling these people, especially these people that they are trying to get into Yogaville. Because some people might wonder, oh, were they doing this purposefully, or are they bought into the system as well? And you saying that tells me that, at least on some levels, this is intentional and purposeful.
Yeah, and then even after that, there's an excuse or an answer for everything. So they'll say like, oh, these quote unquote bad parts about Yogaville, or like because a lot of it is just like what happens when you live and work together in this isolated community. Like people are going to get in fights, and there's going to be like personality clashes and things like that. But it's just magnified to a higher degree, and they would say, and Swami Satchidananda would say like, oh, that's rubbing and scrubbing. Like if you're like a diamond is, a diamond's a piece of coal, but it's like after it's all this pressure that's what makes the beautiful diamond. So like that's what we're doing here. Like it's rough, but we're rubbing and scrubbing each other, and then we're going to help each other get enlightened. And I don't think I heard that saying until after my first month. So it's like you learn more about the bad things, but it's like, oh, the bad things are actually good for you.
I find the reframing of it all to be very interesting. We're going to show you this perfect, beautiful thing for 30 days, and maybe you'll be invested enough in 30 days that when you start hearing the bad stuff, we can say the bad stuff isn't actually that bad and the bad stuff is good for you. That is so interesting to me, and that's a level of manipulation that I think is actually more common than a lot of people think. This idea that you must somehow go through something bad or traumatic or horrible in order to become a better person or to become who you were always meant to be, kind of thing, is a very interesting thing I think we have in society. And it's interesting for them to use the bad parts over here are actually the beneficial part of coming to Yogaville. But we're only going to tell you that after you've been here for 30 days.
Yeah, and even like when you read these court documents with Shanti Norris and it's two former secretaries of Swami Satchidananda, and how the people who defend Swami Satchidananda, and I think even the women, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I'm pretty sure I read that the women at the time believed that this was for their benefit. Like they were like abused by this man. Some of these women were underage, and I know one for sure, she was underage when she got to Yogaville, and her parents signed over custody to the Integral Yoga Organization and Swami Satchidananda. And then after she turned 18, after like this grooming process, is when he started sexually abusing her. And a lot of people will say like, oh, well, he was enlightened, so he knows so much more than we do, and we can't understand how he operates. So at first they would just deny all this sexual assault and say, oh, of course that never happened. And then when just like more and more came out, and that where it's clearly there were sexual encounters that he was having, even though he was saying he was celibate, they're like, oh, well, he did that, but he's enlightened, and he was probably doing this for their benefit. And then even like with the cult of MAGA, these people who voted for Trump, and so quickly, we're only 2 months into this right now, they're already like losing benefits and things like that. And some people are like realizing that they made a mistake, but a lot of them are just doubling down and like, oh, there's this, like, because Elon Musk was like, oh, there's going to be a shock to the economy, but it'll get better. And they're like, oh, well, like, I lost all these benefits and things, but like it'll get better later. So yeah, there's a lot of reframing in many different kinds of cults of things that are objectively horrible. It's like, if you just wait it out, it'll eventually get better. And you'll realize that these horrible things that are happening to you are actually for your benefit.
It'll all be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of bringing back the comparison between cults and abusive relationships too, that first month, that light program was kind of the love bombing.
Mm-hmm.
And then so after, when things start to come up that you might turn your head out, you might start to reconsider, it then gets reframed. In an abusive relationship, they have love bombing. Then the first time they yell or physically put their hands on someone, it's just because I love you so much. I'm doing this for your benefit. And then bringing it back to the cult of MAGA, you can't trust anyone else. Mm-hmm. I'm the only person you can trust. Everything I do is for your benefit. If you leave me, you will suffer. And I literally saw someone say, I would rather be in a right-wing dictatorship than a left-wing democracy.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hit my head against the wall because I'm like, what have we come to? But cults are super powerful in their ability to make people do things that are really against their own interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's that whole bounded choice thing. It's like you're making these decisions, but it's after you've already kind of been indoctrinated in this way. So yeah, you believe that the bad things are good.
Yeah, Cam, that's definitely like slam my head against a wall ideology. But what I've realized, though, there are definitely people who don't actually believe the thing they're saying, but they would rather double down on being wrong than to admit they're wrong. But again, it goes into that reframing thing and how I'm not finding out. I'm just going through a rough patch and then everything will be fine.
Exactly. And I also think there's a piece of eventually that group, that cult, becomes part of your identity. So to reject that cult is to reject part of yourself, which some people can't do.
Exactly.
And Brianna, in one of your Surviving Satchidananda podcast episodes, you mentioned the mantra initiation, which I found super interesting. For our listeners, can you describe what that process was?
Yeah, so mantra initiation, there's in the yogic and a lot of Hindu tradition, there's mantras or syllables that you repeat internally during your meditation. So you'll just like repeat these sounds in your mind, and every time your mind strays, you notice that, you're supposed to bring it back to your mantra or your object of meditation. And you can use, like, they say Om is the best mantra, but they also say, like, if a guru imparts a mantra on you, then it's like extra special and stuff like that. So that was a big deal at Yogaville, is they would initiate you into this lineage. That's another thing in yoga, is they call it the Guru Paramparam, or the lineage of gurus. So you're theoretically supposed to be able to trace your guru back to like thousands of years ago. So you can trace Swami Satchidananda's lineage of his guru to like that guru's guru. And so I was initiated into it's called the Saraswati lineage. And the ceremony that they had us go through was we had to dress in all white. That was a big thing there. Everybody was dressed in white a lot of the time. And it was optional to fast beforehand. So I fasted for like 3 days beforehand. I only drank water for 3 days leading up to this. And then we went into one of the main meditation halls, and one of the swamis told us the mantra and how to say it properly in Sanskrit. And then we were all like repeating it over and over again. And then she came behind each of us. There was three of us, and they're getting the mantra during my initiation. And then so like she would touch all of our heads. And then when she touched my head, I could feel this like honey sensation dripping down my spine. And then they say like, you know, that it was like the mantra is like a seed that was being planted in you.
And what did you feel after the initiation?
I think it was probably a combination of like not eating for 3 days and then like and chanting a lot. I was kind of like disoriented and just like not really sure exactly what happened, but it just felt like, and it was also built up so much. I was like, okay, I guess this is like a new chapter in my life that I've just started with this new mantra. And it, yeah, there was supposed to be a commitment that I was supposed to make to like not like do any mind altering substances. And like, I think I stopped smoking weed for a few days and then I was like, okay, I kind of want to smoke weed again. So really like the commitment didn't last that long for me, but, it felt important at the time, and I use that mantra a lot when I would meditate after that, and then even to this day, like when I go to meditate, like subconsciously the mantra will just like come up when I'm not even trying to repeat it.
I actually think when you were kind of walking through and explaining that, one of the things that kind of stood out to me and that jogged my memory was from the lawsuit. I believe it was Susan actually. But it may have been Sharon. So I'll fact check that and I'll put the correct answer on the YouTube video or in the description. But Swami Satchidananda actually assaulted her. He had given her a mantra of don't think, just obey, don't think, just obey. And had been doing that to her systematically for months leading up to the first time he assaulted her. I think it's interesting because I think that's the first time kind of hearing it from you, kind of understanding why that mantra meant so much to her in that moment, because it came directly from him. And in a way, how you have, at least in my understanding, you have framed it as that being one of the most important things you can be given in that moment from your guru. And I was not aware of that. And that's very interesting to me.
Yeah. And I think also since, again, the guru wasn't there or wasn't alive when I was there, I didn't have that connection. And also, at the time, everybody was getting the same mantra. So I think when Swami Satchidananda was alive, he would give people different mantras. And when he would initiate people, they would all get different mantras. And then eventually at one point, this is what the person who initiated me told me. She said that like at one point, he was like, oh, there's too many different vibrations happening. We want everybody to be on the same vibration. So then they started giving everybody the same mantra. So I guess it wasn't as emotional of a connection for me since I wasn't so as much caught up in the guru aspect of it. But if there's like this larger than life guy who's meeting with all these politicians and world dignitaries and flying all around the world and they give you this special thing, I probably would have taken it a lot more seriously.
Which is perfectly reasonable. So now since you've kind of broken down that experience for us, are there any specific things that you feel upon reflection are programming or felt like they were a means to get you deeper devoted to Yogaville?
I may have to think about that for a few seconds. They say it takes like 10 years to completely deconstruct after leaving a cult, and I've only been out for like a few years at this point. I think it was really like the philosophy, getting all those benefits during my first month and continuing to feel the physical and mental benefits. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything else I can think of at the moment that was particularly manipulative.
Okay, well, we'll take that as food for thought, and then maybe as you unravel that over your journey, we can circle back to this question, or you can let everybody know how you're feeling on your podcast.
Sure, yeah. I'll think about that. I'll keep thinking about it.
So you've talked a little bit about the rules and expectations that were put on you as an employee at Yogaville. Can you talk us through some of those spoken and unspoken rules and expectations that you had while at Yogaville?
Sure. The first one I can think of is no meat. So if you're living on ashram property, no meat or eggs. They allowed dairy products, so you weren't allowed to eat any meat. Your diet was controlled. I think the first rule, I don't know if it's still on their website, but for a while, the first rule on their website was like respect the guru. But they didn't really say what exactly disrespect meant. But I found that to be like really any questioning of anything that he said, or if you questioned too much or with the intention of maybe finding out things that were going to cast him in a negative light, that was pretty much not allowed. No sex, no, not even like kissing or hand holding, no PDA. The spiritual practice requirements, so like the 5 a.m. meditations, the yoga classes, going to the Saturday night. They had an event on Saturday nights where they would sing kirtan and like they would watch a video of Swami Satchidananda and then someone else would talk, so that you were required to go to that. That's all I can think of. Those are like the main ones that I can think of right now. Oh, clothing. So you weren't, it was supposed to be modest clothing, so you weren't really, I think, supposed to show like above your knees at all. No tank tops. And they even said at one point, I don't think this is like, that was really enforced, especially on the weekends, but it said like no leggings or yoga pants. So it was like, okay, we're in Yogaville and you can't wear yoga pants. I mean, technically, like the spandex isn't really good for practicing yoga because you're trying to like detoxify, and like that spandex kind of keeps the sweat in your body. So like in the 70s, like when in the 60s and 70s, when they first started practicing yoga in the West, the Swami Satchidananda followers would tell people when you come to a class, wear loose, comfortable clothing, which I still find to be the way I prefer. But still, like most people that come to visit are like, they're going to wear leggings and yoga pants. So the clothing requirements as well.
And did you feel like there were any unspoken rules or expectations?
So there was like the no disrespecting of the guru, which was kind of ambiguous of what disrespect meant. But I don't think it was really spoken that you were supposed to revere the swamis that were there currently. Like, I think in general you're supposed to respect everybody, but they kind of expected you to like revere these older women swamis in a way.
Interesting. Do you feel like these expectations and rules were applied equally to everybody who lived at Yogaville?
No, because once you, like, if you're living on the ashram property, there's so much more that's expected of you. But if you live off property, so like if you go to Yogaville, there's this one road that goes through it. And on the right side of the road, it's technically like ashram property, and they own this 700 acres on one side of the road. And on the other side of the road, it's not owned by Yogaville, but like pretty much everybody that's associated with Yogaville lives there, and it's like walking distance from like the meditation hall and everything like that. So if you live on the other side of the road and you can afford a house, you don't really have to follow any of those rules. So there were some people who I guess like enjoyed living in the community or liked Swami Satchidananda in a way, but they didn't like the current ashram administration, so they were much more like vocally dissenting of the current leadership, which you didn't have really the ability to do without the risk of getting kicked out if you lived on their property.
Interesting. Okay.
What were some of the criticisms against the current leadership that you heard about?
I mean, there was no way to, like, if you didn't agree with a decision, there's no democracy. It's just like these people who they're on their website. If you look up their leadership, there's 3 different boards, and you'll see like some of the same people are on multiple different boards. So there's like 5 to 10 people maybe that make decisions that affect the entire Integral Yoga Global Network. So there's teachers that have been teaching integral yoga classes for decades. And maybe they live in Brazil or New York. And like, especially after all these controversies happened, they came to the administration and were like, we really need you to address these things. We don't want to continue training new yoga teachers under you unless you address these issues that have all come up. And these are people that have like are really doing more work, I would say, than these 10 people on the boards. They're like the ones that are really out there doing this stuff, but they're like they didn't listen to these these teachers. So yeah, it's not like a normal nonprofit where it's like you vote for the board or you vote on bylaws. It's just like Swami Satchidananda made these rules, and we're the 5 to 10 people who enforce them, and sometimes we'll like add a couple extra rules because we knew Swami Satchidananda the best and that sort of thing.
So you've described Yogaville as feeling like a high control environment. What specific aspects contributed to this feeling for you?
I would say like the appearance control, controlling what you wear. I mean, even it didn't say you couldn't wear makeup, but like Swami Satchidananda had all these, like, they recorded like everything he ever said for like decades. And so there would be times where he would say like he didn't like when women wore makeup or stuff like that. So, I mean, I usually don't wear makeup anyway, but like that was like, that's part of the appearance control. The schedule of waking up early in the morning, the meditations that were required. I think those are the main things. It's like appearance control, the amount of labor that you're expected to do, and I guess just like all those rules that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, one of the things I found in my research was that Swami Satchidananda allegedly said that he would rather see a woman in rags than see her go to work. And so I'm not exactly sure where and when that came from, whether it was a talk or maybe something more private. But I do feel like he had some interesting thoughts on what specifically women should and shouldn't do.
Yeah, that reminded me there was, when he was alive, this is something I was told by people that lived there for decades. He was alive and there was women who were like, oh, we want to create like a women's study group. And he was like, no, you can't do that because like we're trying to reach enlightenment. And when you're enlightened, you realize that we're all the same. So if you like talk amongst women, then you're really that's like straying further away from enlightenment. It's kind of like the whole like, oh, if you talk about racism, then you're contributing to it. But I think he also like he knew he was messing around with so many different people, and there's probably women who weren't exactly happy about that. So I don't think he wanted women to have any kind of control or a platform to even speak privately about yoga philosophy. And so even when I was working in the marketing department, there were women who, like some of the younger generation who didn't know Swami Satchidananda when he was alive. They were like, oh, we want to have like a women's yoga retreat. And so it was, I think they eventually were able to have those, but they had to fight to like say, can we just have, like a women's group over the weekend? This is going to be a way that we can make money. And apparently like the people, like those 5 to 10 people who I mentioned were like, absolutely not. But I think they eventually did convince them because I remember those retreats happening. But even like long after he died, they were like, they didn't want people to do that.
So that's actually really interesting to me because that feels like another bid for power in the sense of I can't provide a safe space for people to have conversations where it could potentially be revealed to a greater group of people the activities of which I'm doing. But to me, that reads as a knowledge of guilt that I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing. And if I provide a space where women could get together and start talking, things may come out about what I'm doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Dev, along that point, I think this statement and idea that no, we are one group also contributes to keeping everyone in line. And that's really important for cults because you have to make people feel like they are not individuals. They are part of a group. The group comes before them. So, Brianna, I'm curious how this pressure to conform manifested itself at Yogaville.
It's interesting because I personally felt the pressure to conform in terms of like the rules of like the labor requirements and I guess the behavior control, like you're supposed to be happy always. So I kind of felt that pressure. But in terms of like, in some ways I felt more free because like everybody at Yogaville was so weird that like as long as I like covered my knees and my shoulders, like I could wear whatever I want. And they had this thing called the boutique. It was like a free store. It was like a free Goodwill. And so like people would come. A lot of people with money go to Yogaville. So like it's in driving distance from DC. So a lot of people from DC will come down on the weekends and then like drop off all their clothes. So I would just like wear just like crazy clothes that I would never have worn in the outside world at Yogaville. And so it was, in some ways I felt like I needed to conform, and in other ways I felt like I was expressing myself more.
Yeah, that's a really interesting dichotomy there. But I actually want to focus on something that you said, that there was this expectation to be happy always. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so again, let's like that was one of the things that drew me to Yogaville in the first place. It was like this promise of if you do yoga, you will be enlightened, which means you'll be happy always. And people at Yogaville are all like, even if something horrible is happening, like a lot of times they'll still have a smile on their face. And so I would see all these people who were smiling around me, even, you know, when things aren't that great. So I would be like, oh, well, you know, I'm must be doing something wrong. I'm probably not doing yoga the right way, or like I'm not as close to enlightenment as these other people. So like I need to like act like I'm happy. And it kind of, they wouldn't explicitly say like, oh, if you like have mental illness, then like you're wrong. But it was like this subtle shaming of like if you were depressed or like had any other emotion other than happiness or joy, then it was like seen as a bad thing, and like made me I would feel guilty for not being happy, even if there's valid reason for me not to be happy.
That's so interesting to me. And that's actually not the first time I've heard that within cult dynamics, there is this like shaming for not being one of us, for lack of a better phrase, when it comes to specifically mental health struggles. And which I always found really interesting, because one of the things that me and Cam talked about on our podcast is the psychology of cult members. And a lot of people join cults when they are in a space of depression, when they're in a space of transition, when their mental health may not be at its peak amount of healthiness. So I just find it very sad that there seems to be this shaming, subtle shaming of you having these mental health struggles, when in a lot of ways that might be what got you there in the first place.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to purity culture too, because I know for a fact when I was there, you weren't allowed to be on any mental health medication if you were living on campus. And I feel like a primary reason for that, I would assume, is because they didn't have any mental health resources, and it would be a liability for them, I think, in ways. But like, you should know at this point that people are coming to Yogaville when they're not doing their best, because they use all these transformation stories like, oh, I came to Yogaville and I was feeling so horrible, and then I stayed here and then now I'm feeling better. So like you're not supposed to use medication. And a lot of people were on medication, but they were quiet about it and they wouldn't tell people. And but a lot of people would say like would shame you if you were on any type of mental health prescription. And I think it goes like down to the purity, like with the food that you eat. They're very like particular about the food, because you're supposed to be like purifying yourself for enlightenment. And that's like, a drug or a mental health prescription that you're putting in your body that's like not pure. And then after COVID happened, like it was revealed that like a lot of these Yogaville people are anti-vaxxers. And there has been some literature written about this. And also it's like in Christian communities as well, like with this Mennonite community that refuses to vaccinate against measles, which like we know this is a safe vaccination. It's not like a new experimental thing. Like I can understand the COVID one is new, so like I can understand the hesitation there. But like the MMR vaccine, we know that that's fine. But like these Mennonite communities, and I think it goes back to the purity of Like, we're not going to put any of this unpure substances in our body. Even if you're going to, like, these kids are dying of measles now, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And your specific example of measles is one that really upsets me the most, because I saw probably at this point, maybe 6 months ago, and it was the first child has died of measles in like 70 years or something like that. And it was so depressing that like we're not protecting people from this. And it's like you're saying, I can understand. I am pro-vaccination. I am team everybody needs to be vaccinated. But even I was like, I don't know if I want to get the first draft. Maybe I get the second one, you know? Like, I'm gonna wait a little bit. I just want to make sure there ain't no real side effects, right? And that's fine, you know, trust but verify, right? But it does also just make me sad that like perpetrating this idea that mental health medications are bad for you or unpure, or are in some ways contributing to your inability to reach enlightenment is so sad, because some people desperately need that medication. And I'm sure the people who were just taking it in silence and weren't saying anything might have even been some of the people who desperately needed that medication.
Yeah, and I actually stopped taking my meds when I was there. Like, I was on an SSRI, and I just abruptly stopped taking it, which like you're never supposed to do. You're always supposed to taper down with the help of a doctor. But like I just stopped taking this substance that I was taking for a really long time. No one told me to do that, but it was just like this subtle shaming that I felt. And so I stopped taking it, and now I had like these horrible withdrawal effects that I could have avoided if I continued to take it, or if I wanted to taper down. I could have done it in a much safer way than cutting it cold turkey.
Right. Because again, that's just unsafe. That's not even like okay, I do want to get off of this medication, but let's do it safely. Yeah, I'm so sorry you experienced that.
Yeah, thank you.
In your podcast, one of your guests mentioned that she was experiencing a psychotic break, and when she went to receive support, I'm not sure if this was a Yogaville therapist or what their title was, but the advice was basically shower and clean yourself, which for our listeners, if you weren't aware, that is not exactly the solution to a psychotic break. Showering is helpful, but that's not the be all end all. Can you talk more about what mental health support looked like at Yogaville?
There was none. That person that was mentioned, that was in the second episode with my friend Satya, that was no one with any mental health qualifications. That was a Swami who had followed Swami Satchidananda decades ago and has lived in Yogaville for a really long time and has not really much experience with the outside world. So this person was clearly having a psychotic break and needed to be evaluated at the very minimum. Probably should have been like hospitalized or monitored or given some sort of medication to help reduce these symptoms. But the Swami just said, like, just shower. And like, I think part of her delusions were like she just felt so dirty and impure and like was paranoid about that. And the Swami was just like, just shower and think that just repeat to yourself that I'm cleaning myself. So yeah, there was really no adequate mental health services at all. There's some psychologists that are associated with Yogaville, but I don't think there were ever any that were hired by the ashram to support program participants. So yeah, there was really nothing. They would have like you can get spiritual support, which I mean can be helpful in times of mental crisis. It can be good to have a spiritual advisor with other support systems. But like if that's the only one and you're not referring people, I feel like they should at least know the signs of like, okay, like this is out of my wheelhouse. We need to take you to get evaluated.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's none of that. And I think if the mental health situation got too bad, they would just like kick people out.
That's really upsetting. From somebody who has a great deal of mental health struggles, that's really upsetting. But So to kind of piggyback off of what you just described in the experience of someone kind of reaching out for help from who I would presume to be in a higher position or power within Yogaville, based on your experience, how would you describe the power dynamics between leadership and the residents at Yogaville?
Yeah, they have complete control over everything, over all the rules. I remember one time we were practicing yoga outside. I think it was like the first day of spring. They would do 108 sun salutations. It's a 12 pose sequence, and you would do it 108 times on the first day of spring for some reason. And we were doing that outside, and I saw someone walk in to, I don't know I think they were working at the front desk, and this person wasn't a Swami then, but they're a Swami now. And he went in, and I saw them have like a brief exchange, and then he walked out. And then later I found out that like he got kicked out. It was like just from that interaction. Like I don't know exactly what happened, but it was such a brief interaction. And it was this woman that had like a lot of power and authority in the community. And whatever happened, I don't think he like threatened her at all. He didn't seem like that type of person that would do that. So I think she just probably didn't like what he said and was like, yeah, you need to leave. That was like the biggest thing, is like the threat of being kicked out without any resources. And the people with authority can do that because Yogaville is private property and they don't have to let anybody on there technically. So even if that's been your home for years, if like you piss off the wrong person one day, you can get kicked out, and then if you don't have money, then you're screwed.
And do you feel like there was also a feeling of shame that would come with being kicked out?
Yeah, because even if you lived in the surrounding community, like if you lived on the other side of the street, they would make it so you can't come on the property. And like a lot of times, like I would never really like buy into that. Like, so if someone got kicked out and they were my friend, I'm not going to like stop talking to someone who's my friend just because like some random person at the ashram didn't like them one day. Like I would still talk to them and like, you know, express my sympathy. But yeah, I'm sorry, I forget the question. What was it again?
Was there a feeling of shame?
Yeah, so like I wouldn't personally shame anybody for getting kicked out, but the people who were really devoted and quote unquote true believers, if like the administration said anything, they believed that they were acting through the will or with the will of Swami Satchidananda. So it's like, oh, well, they kicked that person out, so I'm gonna give them the cold shoulder and I won't look at them. Like, especially with this new, like, well, all the revelations that came out a couple of years ago, there are people that still live in Yogaville who want to see things change, who feel empathy towards these women who came forward that they were and said that they were abused by the guru, and they posted online that, you know, they support the women and they want to see some sort of reconciliation happen. And these swamis that they really looked up to that supported them through low points in their life, they just like wouldn't even look at them when they would cross paths anymore, like completely ignore them like they didn't exist. So that's another thing about cults, is like there's the exit costs. So like part of the exit cost of leaving Yogaville is if you don't have any money, that's a huge cost of leaving. It's like that's part of the thing that keeps you there, but also these social ties. Like if you fall out of line some way that these people don't like you, there's a lot of people who will like pretend like you never existed to them, even if you had a really close relationship.
Did you feel the need to hide the fact that you were still reaching out to people and maintaining friendships with people who had been kicked out?
I never did. I mean, I think I felt that pressure, but I never, like, I just felt like that was too far. Like if, because a lot of people that lived at Yogaville and still live at Yogaville don't have a lot of respect for this leadership, and don't like, and they may hide the fact just to like protect themselves so they don't get kicked out. But there's a lot of people that just like don't respect what they say and will, you know, support their friends regardless.
That sort of brings me to my next question, which is, when did you first become aware of any criticisms or controversies surrounding Swami Satchidananda or Yogaville as a whole?
Well, for Yogaville as a whole, I found out about some controversies before I arrived, but after I'd already paid. So like after I already signed up to do this program and I was excited about it, there's this website called Cult Education, and they have like resources about all different types of cults. And Yogaville's on there, and there's a ton of resources about Yogaville there. But the one that I saw at the time, I think through a Google search, I ended up finding one about this girl, Catherine Chang, who got there to do the same 4-week-long like program in the 90s. And I think she was going to law school. She was going to some like very prestigious university and like was just taking a break from school like I was. But during the 3rd week of her light program, she ended up marrying one of the swamis there. And since you're like not supposed to be married when you're a swami, the swami like renounced his vows, so he wasn't going to be a swami anymore. But they ended up getting married after only a few weeks. So yeah, it can happen pretty quick.
We covered her story on our podcast, and I think the entire situation is messed up. One of the most messed up things about it was the age difference and the fact that apparently prior to her going to Yogaville, she was very vocal about being against relationships where there is that huge age difference. And it was just super creepy to me that there's this old guy who allegedly has not had sex in 15 years, and he meets this younger woman who's studying to be a lawyer, and in the matter of a few weeks, she has completely changed the direction of her life. She doesn't want to go to law school anymore, and she wants to marry this man who was like 30 years older than her.
Yeah. So I had read about that, I think like a week or so before I got there. And I was like, the website, the website still looks very old, the Cult Education website. So I was like, this kind of looks like a sketchy website. And this happened so long ago. And I know I'm not going to get married to anybody after 3 weeks. So like, I'll probably be fine. But that guy, his name was Sundaram. His legal name was Larry Gross. And then when I was there, his name was Sundaram. And I didn't realize that this was a guy that was like doing a lot of the rituals or like performing a lot of the puja rituals. And I didn't realize that was the guy until like over a year after I'd been there. I was like, oh wait, that was the guy that married the girl after 3 weeks. And I never saw Catherine there. So I don't know if they got divorced or she moved or what. I really want to find her and talk to her. But yeah, so he was there, and I met him and like did a lot of rituals with this guy who married this really young woman. But the first time I heard about Swami Satchidananda, I think it was definitely after the light program. So like there's the light program, and then there's like a different version called like the ashram yogi program. So like after you do that first month, you can make a longer commitment to stay there for at least 3 months. And I think they ask you to do like a little bit more of meditation and yoga and things like that. So it was when I was in that program that I started hearing some rumors about that from other people at Yogaville. But it was always like, oh, it was consensual. Like he was having these relationships, but they were, it was 2 consenting parties. But I was like, well, he said he was celibate anyway. So even if it was consensual, he made vows and he was telling the world that he was celibate. But then I would always justify it to myself, like, okay, well, he's not alive anymore, and maybe it was consensual, because I can see in some way, like if you just like saw Swami Satchidananda at Woodstock and like your first interaction was like, oh, he's cute, I want to like have sex with him or something. I can see like how that can be consensual, but that's not what was happening. Like he was grooming these young girls and young women, and then cultivating this father-daughter relationship. That's another thing that's listed in the court documents, and from my own experience, people calling this guy dad. like he would cultivate this father-daughter bond and then sexually exploit them. So that's not what was happening. So like I was never getting the full story, and I also wasn't hearing it from people who actually experienced it. So I was like, I don't know what the truth is. So yeah. And I was also experiencing so many benefits from living at Yogaville, and again, like he wasn't alive. So yeah, I ended up staying, but that's how the first times I heard about the bad things that were going on.
Yeah, and I think it's hard also when these things are kind of whispers. And at that point, Shanti Norris hadn't published her statement.
Mm-hmm.
So aside from the allegations that happened in the 90s, you didn't really have that reporting or the statements coming from the women themselves. Mm-hmm. And then you're also in this space where you're receiving all of these benefits and you're beginning to identify Yogaville with so many positive aspects and Swami Satchidananda with so many positive aspects that it's hard to reconcile those allegations with what you know about him.
Exactly. And it was also, I was hearing these rumors from people who weren't around when he was alive. So I was like, you wouldn't know because you weren't there. But I knew enough not to ask the people that would know, because that would risk me getting kicked out.
After you kind of started hearing all the whispers, was there a point where you were like, I need to know what actually happened, and you began to look into those things? Or was it Shanti's and Susan's lawsuit or statement that kind of began prompting your understanding of what actually happened?
I think it was after I left in 2019 where I really started doing like the deep dives online and like finding a lot more stuff about it. But again, a lot of that information was so old. But then it was like once Shanti Norris came out, then I was like, okay, this is like a real person who experienced this. There's a lot of people that don't like the people in the leadership, I feel like, don't show respect to Shanti, but she was a well-respected person in the community. So it was like hearing it from like an actual person who went through it. I was like, okay, like this is real now. This really happened and it was harmful. So yeah, it was like in 2019 where I was reading more and like becoming way more skeptical, especially like after leaving too. It's easier to question, but it was definitely like the firsthand accounts that made me make the decision to not be involved anymore.
And how did people both in Yogaville and outside of Yogaville feel about you leaving?
Well, I had like my good friends, I guess, were sad that I was leaving. And I think at that point, like I was so deep into Yogaville that like the majority of my social connections were there, and like all of my other friendships on the outside had kind of fizzled out. So there wasn't really much like opinions from people who were on the outside of Yogaville of me leaving, I guess, other than my parents. I guess they were happy that I was closer because I was so far away. They didn't understand the full scope of everything at the time. So I guess they were like happy to be back and happy that I was closer to them. But yeah, I had a few friends at Yogaville who were sad to see me go. But then a lot of other people who were just like, really like fake friendly, they didn't really like seem like they cared at all.
It was like once you're out, you're no longer relevant or important to them.
Exactly.
Would you say that most of those feelings were when you physically left in 2019 or when you officially severed ties in 2022?
Like what feelings specifically?
People being sad about you leaving and like your real friends being, sad but understanding.
Yeah, I mean, like I had a boyfriend at the time that lived in Yogaville. He still lives there. He wasn't like, he lives across the street and he's like not super. He's not bought into the Swami Satchidananda stuff at all. So like he was obviously like sad to see me leave. Like as soon as I like decided, or as soon as I had to leave, and yeah, there was like a few other friends who like when I told them I was leaving, they were sad. But like you said, Cameron, like there was people who was like, oh, you're not here, so it's like out of sight, out of mind.
So you've also written a series of Medium articles about Yogaville, why you consider it a cult, and your experiences there. And in one of those, you mentioned your mom visiting, and she sort of made a comment about, oh, it's kind of strange that this old guy is everywhere around. Can you talk more about your parents' feelings about Yogaville? Did they think it was just a kind of weird group, or were they at some points afraid for you?
Yeah, I think they definitely thought it was weird, but it was also like they saw that I was a lot healthier and like I was so depressed and like I had recently gotten out of a psychiatric hospital. Like it was less than a year before I got to Yogaville. And so they were like, okay, well, like this place is a little bit weird, but she seems like she's doing all right. She seems like she's doing a lot better than before. So like, who cares if it's a little bit weird? But then it was like during that Tiger King thing, like I put on the Doc Antle story, not realizing that like I knew a lot of those people in that documentary. My mom was in the room when I was watching it, and she was like, wait, this is like, you live, like, what's going on here? So, yeah, I think that's when they realized like, okay, this is a lot, like this is more dangerous. Like we thought it was just weird, but this is like actually harmful.
So Cam has briefly mentioned your Medium articles that we both read during the course of our research. But one of the things we both listened to was your podcast, Surviving Satchidananda. And we would love if you could kind of explain to us and our audience what motivated you to start that podcast and to begin sharing your story initially through Medium and now through your podcast.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what led me to like when I first thought of a podcast, but I knew like I think probably like 2020-ish, I was like, there's so much here, like this would be a really good podcast. So I had been thinking about it for a while, and I had mentioned it to one of the friends where I live now, and he's a journalist, and he was like, oh, I could help you with that. So like he'd helped me with a lot of the planning phase of it. So I probably wouldn't have done it if he wouldn't have like stepped in and helped me in that way. And there was also like the studio that I'm in now and like where I use all the equipment. There's this group called the Virginia Audio Collective that if you're in the Charlottesville area, it's an awesome resource if you want to do anything with audio. They have a ton of free equipment that you can use, and you don't all you have to do is just like sign a paper that says you're a member of the Virginia Audio Collective. So it's just like having these different resources available to me. But before I knew I wanted to do the podcast after, and then like getting the help, the support from the collective and my friend who's a journalist. But I was still like nervous to talk about this publicly, I guess because of like lawsuits, and also the area where I live now, there's still people, I still run into people from Yogaville, like at the grocery store and stuff. So I was like, if I do this, like I know I'm going to run into these people at, at Food Lion or Wegmans or something, and like I don't want to do that. So I guess like the Medium articles were part of me like reading and about cults and deconstructing from this experience and like sharing as I was going through that deconstruction process, but also like just kind of getting used to putting my voice out there before the podcast came out, because I knew more people would be listening than they would be reading on Medium, because with the Audio Collective they have like they promote it through this radio station that it's based out of. So I was like, I know more people will be listening than reading, so that like the writing was like me getting my feet wet a little bit with it. And I would like to write a book about this one day.
I was just gonna say, I absolutely think you should write a book, and I will be the first person to come and buy it.
Thank you. I'll give it to y'all for free for an Amazon review or something.
Oh, we'll do it for sure. We'll do it, but we believe in supporting people, so
thank you.
We will personally buy it and then we'll review it.
Yes.
Awesome.
And I'll also say for our listeners and watchers, definitely check out Brianna's Medium articles as well. Brianna, you are an amazing writer, and I just love the way that you write. and how it not only conveys information in a clear way, but it also brings the emotion into it. Because I feel like that's really important when you're talking about your own experiences, and especially experiences that are really traumatic.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback off of what Cam was saying, we both listened to your podcast in preparation for our episodes. And I kind of jokingly said to Cam one day, I was listening and I forgot that I was doing research because I just got so sucked in, because your storytelling ability and the way you choose to explain, you also have a great voice for radio, just full stop
Thank
on that.
you.
But I was so invested and sucked into the story that I forgot I was supposed to be taking notes and understanding what was going on. But it's very well done. And we fully support and appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us, and allow us to kind of share and cross promote your story.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And like the questions you're asking are helping me like look back on this experience in a new way and help me understand it more. So I really appreciate you guys having me on.
So you mentioned when you were thinking about the podcast and publishing the articles, one of the hesitations or fears in your mind was the reaction that Yogaville members in your community would have. Can you talk us through some of the reactions that you've encountered from people who've listened to your podcast or read your articles?
I would say the vast majority of the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive and supportive. There has been a few people who are like true believers, who I've run into them in the grocery store and like they'll give me a dirty look or something. But a lot of these Yogaville people are like so afraid of confrontation that they're like most likely not going to do anything. I've gotten some like weird DMs on Instagram from people in India. So I'm like, I don't know what that's about. I mean, I know it's about the podcast because they mentioned it, but I'm like, this is just like kind of strange. But I mean, the vast majority and even people that still live at Yogaville are like, I can't say this publicly, but like, I love your podcast. And like I've been sharing this with people here, and this is so necessary that people are talking about this because they refuse to change.
I'm really happy to hear that most of the reactions have been positive because, like you said, it is a really good podcast, and especially bringing in people who have also experienced Yogaville continues to just give more context into what it was actually like there. And something that we'll get into in a little bit, but I just want to mention is that it's important to call out that the experiences weren't all bad, that there are still pieces from it that you might incorporate into your life today, or pieces that you look back on and still appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have stayed there as long as I did if there wasn't so many benefits. Like I mentioned, just like the health benefits from eating the healthy food, from living in this like pristine nature, and the meditation and the yoga was extremely helpful. I made a lot of really good friends that I still talk to. I was just hanging out with someone from Yogaville who, well, they don't live there anymore, but they like grew up there, and I was hanging out with them just yesterday, and we hang out pretty regularly. And a lot of the people that come through Yogaville, like they live all over the world. They're not like in close proximity to me, but like I'll still message them pretty regularly. So just like a lot of really valuable social connections. Like I fell in love with someone there, and he's still a really cool person. So yeah, there's a lot of good things about Yogaville. I'm never going to be someone that says like, oh, Yogaville's all bad and everybody who lives there is horrible, because that just wouldn't be true.
And that's actually something we bring up during our episode of people are still allowed to have positive experiences and positive memories associated in something that generally may be considered bad, right? And there's always something you can learn from an experience, something that you can take away from an experience.
Something else that I found interesting about your podcast was the cover art for it. And in the cover art, Satchidananda's eyes are covered by the text, Surviving Satchidananda. Can you talk us through your thought process when designing the cover art for the podcast?
Yeah, so that's not an original idea by any means. Like that's such a trope that a lot of like horror movies and things have done. So the graphic designer here for the Virginia Audio Collective, I think I Googled like eyes like shaded out movie poster or something, and there was like a collage of like 20 different ones that were all in color, but it was like with the eyes ripped out. And so like I sent her that image of like all these together, and I was like, I wanted to look like this but with surviving Sachidananda over the eyes. And she came back with that, and I think it looks awesome. But another part of the reasoning behind that was there's another one of the rules at Yogaville is there's so much control over his image. So like with how it's displayed and even how you dispose of an image, like you're never like his image is on everything, like I said, but like every envelope there's a picture of him, every piece of stationery. Most Yogaville things have like at least a small picture of him on there, and you're not supposed to ever throw that in the trash can. You're supposed to burn anything with this image on it. So like they would have a burn. There was like a trash can, a recycling can, and then a burn pan or a burn bin. So like anything with his image on it, you would put in that bin someone would burn it. But like this is still like this Yogaville stuff. It's still pretty new coming out. Like it hasn't been completely exposed yet. And I wanted to have to like not show his image in this controlled, uplifting way. Like I wanted it to seem like it was like a true crime, like criminal, like he was a nefarious actor. Like he wasn't this godlike figure that they want to portray him as.
I love that reasoning, especially because they had so much control over his image. It's also another way of you taking that power back.
So earlier today, you talked about how you hung out with somebody who actually grew up in Yogaville just yesterday, and you've maintained good friendships with them. And you've mentioned the intergenerational community building at Yogaville. Can you elaborate on the nature of these relationships?
Yeah, that was another amazing benefit of living at Yogaville is the nature of specifically meal times. Like everybody's eating together, and there's people of all ages. So like when I was living there was kids that were, babies and newborns, or kids that I saw being born there, and then people in their 90s, and everybody like talked together and was building relationships in that way. And that's something I think is really missing in like the outside world, is like we're all like where I live now. It's like I don't really know my neighbors that well. I mean, I know some of them. I know I do live in an intergenerational community, but like I don't talk to these people. Where at Yogaville, it's people of all different ages interacting with each other, and I think that was a really beautiful aspect of it.
I'm a big supporter of knowing your neighbors. Mm-hmm. I know people who were like, especially in apartment buildings, which I live in, they're like, no, I don't want to get to know my neighbors. I'm just in my apartment, closed in, whatever. And both Dev and I, we went to middle school and high school together. We grew up in the South in Georgia. It's definitely a place where, you can go to your next door neighbor and be like, hey, do you have some eggs that I can use? Maybe not now since eggs are expensive, but
yeah.
Do you have some milk that I can use or some sugar? And I was just walking my dog earlier, ran into one of my neighbors and was telling her, getting a dog walker and stuff. And she was like, oh, my daughter's home Tuesdays and Wednesdays. She might be able to help walk your dog. And I just love the community aspect that comes from actually knowing and building relationships with the people who live closest to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's something I'm trying to prioritize now, especially with this new administration and like seeing all of our social safety nets. I've really been like, I don't know my like exact like my next door neighbors too well. I know some of them, but like just people in my city, I'm like really trying to just like build deeper connections and networks of support with the people who live in my community, in my city.
Absolutely. I think that's so important because I say that I'm very close to both of my neighbors. I live next to a retired elderly couple, and my neighbor's wife brings me cookies like once every couple of weeks. And,
I love that.
She's so sweet. She's actually darling. And like I live next to a family, and so they have little kids. And then actually my neighbors above me, their son really likes my dog. And so I was outside and I was letting them play together. And he like ran up to me and was like, well, my 6th birthday party is on Saturday and I would like you guys to come. Like, and I'm like, I got no excuse. They're right upstairs. This little boy knows where I live.
Yeah, you can't lie.
Can't lie.
They're going to know. They're going to knock on your door and find out.
And they did. That's what's funny. Because like I thought I was going to go, but I thought the party started at 3 and apparently it started at 2. And like they came down and were like, hey, like our son is looking for you. Like, are you coming? And I'm like, oh, I'll be right up. So I definitely think it just goes back to like the beauty of community and the beauty of like knowing people on that level. And that's one of the things that, you know, again, we talk about that cults can have positive aspects to them. And I think one of those aspects can be the community that is bred in those scenarios and getting to know your older neighbors and their kids and all that other stuff.
And there's so many interesting people at Yogaville. Like this person recently passed away, but like this guy was an engineer at NASA and he lived there. The guy who created All Things Considered at NPR lives at Yogaville still. And he has amazing, I would go on walks with him like once a week and he would just like tell me stories about the 60s. Like he followed around Martin Luther King for like 2 months and was like close, like reporting on Martin Luther King and like got to know him very well. So there's just so many amazing people that you can just interact with at mealtimes or, you know, on walks and things like that, which was another great benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful.
So for our last few questions, we kind of want to focus more on moving forward and reflecting. So you've mentioned that you, to this day, will still practice yoga and meditation. Can you tell us about what parts of your yoga practice are most important to you?
Yeah, I would say just the time of intentional silence is a big one because even like if I'm physically quiet and not speaking, if I'm like scrolling on my phone, like it can be so loud. Like all that information, a lot of it being negative information about like the news and stuff like that. But just like intentionally taking time, like I'm not going to be inputting anything into my brain right now. I'm going to have my phone turned off. I'm not going to interact with anybody for like this hour. I think that's the big one. When I practice yoga at Yogaville, there's like the integral yoga sequence, which I still really love and get benefit out of. But like I would do the exact same pose sequence every time because that's like what Swami Satchidananda prescribed. But now I'm much more like if I feel like my body needs something, I'll stretch in that way and I won't like make myself be rigid about doing these poses for this set amount of time and holding it for a certain like a certain amount or anything like that.
In one of your articles, you talk about how it's really important to ensure that abuse does not happen in yoga communities. Can you talk about what guidelines you think are important to put in place to ensure that harm doesn't happen?
Yeah, for one, I would say background checks because, like I said earlier, like these types of environments attract people who like to be abusive or are like narcissistic. And at Yogaville in particular and other yoga communities, there's like this concept called spiritual names, which I never agreed to get one. But like a lot of people will take an Indian or a Sanskrit name. And so anybody could go to Yogaville and say, my name is Shankar or any other Indian name, and nobody's going to ask any questions. But like you could, I know for a fact there's been like child abusers that have gone to Yogaville. So like I don't know if they had a background before that, but like I think that should be the bare minimum as a background check. And I work for a spiritual organization now. It's a meditation community that I work for, and they have something called it's called the HEAR committee, hearing, like something, I forget what the acronym stands for, but basically like it's a board of like 10 different people, and if there's ever any issue that anybody has, they can go to anyone on this board that they feel comfortable with. So like right now at Yogaville, it's like if you have an issue, you're probably going to have to talk to somebody who's a Swami Satchidananda apologist, and whatever outcome is going to happen is going to be through that lens. Where with here, first of all, there's no gurus in Buddhist meditation or in this specific community, so there's none of that. But it's like, oh, I don't like these people, or these are the people that made me feel uncomfortable, and maybe they are on the board, but there's other people that I can talk to. So like an autonomous group that's separate from a board of directors or a spiritual life board that people can go to, an accountability process. So like we know, like anytime humans get together, there's probably going to be harm that's going to be caused. And like if we know this is going to happen, we should have a process in place for how do we figure out what exactly happened and how do we hold people accountable. I think that's the bare minimum to start. I don't know like the full answer, but I know there are people that do this work that work with spiritual communities who have gone through this to make the community healthier. A lot of communities have gone through this process and then come out stronger and safer. And I think, yeah, those three things that I mentioned, and like consulting the people who do this work professionally, I think that needs to happen at Yogaville specifically, but like in any yoga or spiritual community that I'm in or that I go into moving forward, they're going to have to have at least those three.
Yeah, I really like the point about the autonomous board or group that people can come to raise complaints, because you're not going to come to somebody to raise a complaint if they're part of the problem.
Exactly.
So that's a way of keeping people silent, really.
Mm-hmm. And that's by design. They want to have as much power and control as possible. So it makes sense from their perspective to continue to have it that way.
So to continue with the kind of ideas of how to ensure that yoga communities are safe, spiritual communities are safe. In our episode, we talk about how yoga does not by any means equal cult. What facets of yoga do you think make it susceptible to cults, and what facets are antithetical to cults?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with what is not cult-like about healthy yoga environments. I would say a democratic or consensus-based decision-making structure, reporting, ways that you can report things that happen that are wrong to people who aren't going to be apologists or try to hide what happened. I think that's important for a healthy situation. But for the unhealthy aspects, you probably have heard of this podcast, but Matthew Remski, he wrote a book and has a podcast called Conspirituality. And he really goes deep into, he's problematic in a lot of ways, but he's really intelligent, and he has a lot of good insights, and his historical analysis of a lot of these like false gurus or destructive leaders. And he has a lot of information about the more negative cult-like aspects. And one of the big things specifically in yoga is this like reverence for like quote unquote the teachings, and it like just like the saying that like these are the teachings, it makes it seem like they're eternal, they're completely ancient and have no like they came from God and all this stuff. So it makes it difficult to question and critically think about these things, where we know in India they had this horrible caste system where people were hurt and exploited and taken advantage of. And a lot of the philosophies are like setting up this for this caste system. So like you can definitely, practice Hinduism or yoga and be a great person. But like also I think it's important to understand like the historical context of where these teachings, these scriptures come from, and look at it that way. In a lot of communities, they don't leave space for that. So I think that's important, like avenues to critically engage with and a lot of yoga communities still revere gurus of all different kinds. And at this point, I don't believe that there's like any healthy way to worship a guru. Like if anytime you're giving someone complete authority over you, I think that's harmful. And there are a lot of communities that still do that. A lot of like cultural appropriation happening, which I think is unhealthy for a lot of reasons, but a lot of times you're getting a watered down version that's can even be more harmful than like what was originally written.
Yeah, kind of cherry picking the pieces that help you. It kind of makes me think about how when slave owners were teaching Christianity to their slaves, they would leave out pieces of the Bible that talked about freedom and individuality because that did not fit into their notion. And it might make people think, wait, if that's part of Christianity too, then why am I being treated like this? So that's what that reminds me of.
Yeah, that information control.
Exactly. And your point about the guru is important too. And sort of thinking back to what we were talking about with the sexual assault allegations against Swami Satchidananda, even when people were saying, oh, it was consensual, can you really have consent between a guru and someone else if that person is literally looking at this person as holier than thou or a god in some ways?
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think that is possible to have consent if you've bought into that ideology and you're a part of that group. I don't think that consent can exist between a guru and a disciple. And they call it's interesting you mentioned slavery because I've been making a lot of connections between like plantation economies and just like the plantation society and like these yoga cults. And the like guru disciple relationship is what we'll say in English, but in Sanskrit or they would say like a guru chela relationship. And again, like there's never going to be a direct translation, so sometimes it's translated to disciple, but a lot of times chela is translated to slave, so it's literally a guru slave relationship, and you can never have a consensual relationship with your slave master because they own you.
Yeah.
That is so interesting.
So we've talked a lot about Yogaville, your criticisms of it, the things that you enjoyed while you were there. What do you feel like is misunderstood about Yogaville?
I would say that that everybody has bought into the belief system. There's a lot of people that have, obviously, and that like believe Swami Satchidananda is literally God. But then there's a lot of people that don't believe that at all and just want to be there for like the great community aspects of it. So like I live not too far from Yogaville now, or just like in Virginia in general. There's there's people associated with Yogaville all over the state, and I hear a lot of people who don't really know that much about or have never been to Yogaville who like think everybody is this like brainwashed cult member, in which like I do believe it is a cult, and people stay there for various reasons, but everybody does not believe that Swami Satchidananda was this great man. And I think also like there's all the good things that happened there. Like there's everything that I mentioned. A lot of people only see it for its destructive aspects and not all of the good community that exists there.
And like you said, it wouldn't be able to survive if there weren't good aspects to it.
So to take that question and kind of put it more on a general scale, what is one thing you wish people did understand about cults generally?
I would like people to understand that they're probably in a cult and they don't know it, or they have been a part of a cult. Like if you expand the idea of a cult to be a workplace or like a nonprofit organization or maybe a church, if you really look into the definition of a cult and are objective, which can be hard for people to look at the groups they're a part of objectively. You've probably been a part of a cult, and people who've never been into the more stereotypical ones will, like you said in the beginning, be like, "Oh, that could never happen to me," but you probably have been in a group like that.
And one thing that we talk about in one of our episodes is this distinction between destructive and benign cults. There are a lot of benign cults where maybe they're not financially exploiting their members, or individuals are not necessarily causing extensive psychological harm, but there is still that attachment variable there that if leaders chose to, they could potentially change it into a destructive cult.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that was also something that we talked about in our very first episode, was being very clear that anybody is susceptible to joining a cult. There is no holier than thou. And I think a lot of times having a mindset of being holier than thou, of that could never happen to me, is one, very unproductive in having these conversations. And two, in my opinion, actually makes you more susceptible, because indoctrination and manipulation is a slow burn process. And and like you were saying, before you know it, wow, this started off as just a fun group where we got together and sang a little bit on weekends. And now all of a sudden I live in this person's house and I do all of their laundry, and I've completely changed the trajectory of my life that started off as something so simple and positive that I could never see becoming a cult.
Yeah. And I mentioned before some of the like really intelligent people that still lived and still live at Yogaville, like people with Ivy League degrees. A lot of famous people were Swami Satchidananda devotees, and there's a lot of like celebrities that are quiet about their like relationship with this group. But so like you see these people who are like, oh, they seem well adjusted, they're really intelligent, they're smarter than I am, so it can't be that bad because they're smarter than me. So yeah, I don't think intelligence, usually the cults recruit more intelligent people.
Exactly. And that was something else that we had talked about, that on average, Cam did the research on this so she can better speak to it, but on average, the average cult member has at least 1 year of education outside of high school, and the average salary was like $100K, you said, Cam?
Yeah, I think 80 to 100K, something like that.
So it's not that was the thing we talked about too. It's like this weird idea but there's this weird ideology that if you're a member of a cult, that you are somehow inherently financially unstable or uneducated. And factually, that's just not the case.
Yeah, that reminded me of there's a mini series on HBO Max called Breath of Fire about the Kundalini yoga, and this white woman named Guru Jagat, or I don't know what I think her name was, like her real name was Katie or something, but she went by Guru Jagat, and so many celebrities were in that. Like Alicia Keys was in there. A lot of like really smart, intelligent, talented people were a part of this group. They're not talking about it now because it's been exposed. But and a lot of times the people who are like have more money and are more intelligent, it's like that bubble that I talked about in the beginning. Like they're only being shown the really positive aspects because they have this resource that they want, which is either money or just the association of like, oh, Alicia Keys is a part of this, so, don't you want to be a part of this celebrity yoga group too?
Absolutely.
So our last question for the episode is, what are your hopes for the future regarding the Yogaville community and the healing of those who have been affected by its negative aspects?
I really hope that there can be an acknowledgement that harm was caused, apology to not only the survivors of the physical abuse, but just everybody that was involved in the organization that wasn't disclosed this information, who was hurt because they saw their friends get hurt. An apology, recognition that this happened, and a democratic leadership structure that's not authoritarian, with the same 5 to 10 people making every single decision for the entire global network. I hope that there can be more comprehensive safety measures put in place for the residents and people who live there, and also just the people who may be coming through to take a class. I hope the community can thrive, because I mean, I went there like at a very low point in my life and got a lot of benefits out of it. And I hope that other people can go there, you know, when they're on a gap year in some transition period and continue to benefit from it and not have these negative aspects from it. There are so many good things about Yogaville. We don't have to, like, all these bad things, we don't have to keep those things. I doubt that's, I hope that can happen, but I doubt it is mainly because of this lawsuit, that they can't acknowledge that these bad things happen, because then they'd be admitting guilt in this lawsuit. They're going to lose this thing anyway. They already lost their counterclaim that they did. I think they're 100% going to lose the other claim too, because I mean, if you read these documents, like the Yogaville's lawyer, the integral yoga lawyer, is just like incompetent. Like you read like this one, the Yogaville lawyer, and then you read the two Shanti and Sharon's lawyer. They have a team of lawyers who like are very intelligent, and you can just read the difference. Like, oh, these people who are making claims on behalf of Yogaville sound like they are in a cult, and they're in New York City. They're not in Yogaville, where that logic makes sense. And they've been so in it for so long that I don't think they realize how crazy they sound. But this is all public record now, and I'm glad it is. But just like they've doubled down so hard on this lawsuit specifically, that I don't think that's gonna happen. If anything, they'd probably have to like bankrupt and start like a newer organization. Maybe it's like the same people, but they start a different organization. I think that would be the best case scenario, or the most likely scenario. The best case scenario would be that it can continue with the acknowledgement of the harm and the putting new systems in place. The best, most likely scenario would be that they'll probably go bankrupt, and then hopefully some of the same people can start a new organization with a lot of the same quality foundation, minus the bad stuff.
Brianna, I also hope that we can get to that best case scenario, but Dev and I have both read the lawsuits and agree with you that it doesn't seem likely that the current leadership would ever acknowledge that there was any harm done. But I do hope that the people who are benefiting from the positive aspects of yoga can continue to receive those benefits, and that we can reduce the harm as much as possible, because yoga, mindfulness, all of these things are extremely beneficial physically, mentally, emotionally, and people deserve a space where they can be truly dedicated to bettering themselves, but also where they are safe in every aspect. And that wraps up our interview with Brianna Patten. Thank you to our listeners and watchers for joining us on this episode. And Brianna, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us today and talk about your experience at Yogaville, and also be vulnerable, because we recognize that, as you said, you were still healing and reflecting on your experience, and that it can be difficult to recount and reflect on some of these things.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was great.
Again, Brianna, I very much appreciate your time doing this interview with us. I feel like I learned so much, not only just from your experience, but talking about and thinking about how Yogaville operates as a whole, how cults operate as a whole, how the spiritual community kind of works together. I'm not somebody who is super knowledgeable about yoga and being in a spiritual community. So this conversation was so enlightening for me. And I feel like I learned a lot from you. And I'm both very appreciative of this conversation and excited to continue to watch your success and watch you work this emotional journey that you're on. And please know that Cam and I are going to be your number one supporters, and that we look forward to hearing more from you, and can't wait for that book to come out.
Thank you so much. Thanks again.
Listeners, if you'd like to check out photos related to the case, be sure to follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
And if you want to listen to Surviving Satchidananda, I really hope you do. The link for that is in the description. I don't have any social media for it at the moment, but hopefully that will change soon. Hopefully I'll have more time to dedicate to that. And if I do, it will be reflected in that link. Yeah, and if you want to reach out to me, you can email me at survivingsachchidananda@gmail.com.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish podcast and where you will inevitably be listening to Surviving Satchidananda. And if you're listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to both of these channels and feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.